They thought Earth was primitive, an insignificant ember drifting in a galaxy of flames. But embers, when pressed, ignite, and what the Galactic Empire mistook for silence was a storm holding its breath. The day they reached Ravos, they learned Earth doesn't kneel. Earth waits. And when it rises, it does not ask. It burns. The Galactic Empire had ruled for over 3,000 years. Worlds burned and bent at its will. From the frozen moons of Vorath to the lava-skinned planets of the Kalan Rift, the Empire's grip was absolute. Entire species had submitted, some voluntarily, others after bloody, brutal campaigns. But never Earth. Earth was considered a backwater, a primitive planet dangling in the Milky Way too far from the Imperial core to be seen as anything but a minor annoyance. When humanity refused the first envoy's demands to kneel, the Empire sent warships. They never returned. Reports came back garbled, filled with static and brief flashes of horror. Imperial dreadnoughts torn apart, mid-warp fleets ambushed in asteroid fields that shouldn't have even existed. Soldiers whispering of ghosts in power armor. Then silence. Vortan Aegir dismissed it as a technical failure or perhaps the handiwork of one of the rogue systems. Earth wasn't even part of the star charts until recently. Surely it couldn't pose a threat. Not when entire planets fell at the mere sight of the Imperial crest. But the silence grew louder. So Vortan Aegir sent Admiral Shurik, one of his most ruthless commanders, to resolve the human problem. A man known for massacres, for ending rebellions before they ever began. He arrived at the Sol system with 27 battleships, 5 carriers, and 100,000 soldiers. He made it as far as Ravos. What came next would haunt the Empire's core forever. The first signs of trouble weren't Earth's weapons. They were in their absence. No planetary defense grids, no orbital mines, no energy shields, nothing. The Empire expected a quick win. Maybe a few rebellious outposts firing old tech. But as the Imperial forces entered Ravos' orbit and prepared to descend, every ship lost contact at once. Within 2 hours, Ravos was under human control. The only broadcast the Empire received was a live video feed from one of their own dropships. A human in torn combat gear with dried blood on his cheeks stared into the camera. His eyes were cold, calculated. "You sent your best," he said. That was cute. He turned slightly, revealing a line of human soldiers standing behind him. Some wore armor patched together with scavenged alien tech. Others carried rifles that glowed with eerie humming cores. Clearly not a standard human issue. "We're the scouts," the man said. "Just a warm-up squad." He leaned forward, grinning like a predator. "The real army hasn't even arrived yet." And then the feed cut out. Across the galaxy, noble houses panicked. Military strategists scrambled to understand what they had just seen. Earth, this undeveloped planet, hadn't just resisted. It had annihilated cleanly, quietly. No messy rebellions, no drawn-out sieges, just gone. But how? The question echoed through the High Council like a virus no one could cure. On Earth, deep beneath the surface of Alaska's Black Mountains, General Saren Vale stood in front of a massive hollow table. Her officers surrounded her, silent and waiting. She was known as the Ice Queen, a legend within the Phantom Division, Earth's covert planetary defense force. Her voice was calm, but carried weight. "The Empire's starting to notice," she said. One of the officers, Captain Ramos, frowned. "Think they'll send more?" Arya looked straight at him. "They always send more." She turned to the table where dozens of red dots lit up one after another, indicating incoming fleets. "Time to wake the sleepers," she said. "Let the real army know it's their turn." Somewhere in deep cryo, thousands of enhanced soldiers began to stir. Earth's real defenders. Soldiers engineered for war in ways the Empire couldn't fathom. Trained in virtual arenas where they killed gods, not men. The Galactic Empire thought Earth was playing defense. They had no idea Earth had been waiting for this war. The Empire wasn't built on fear. It was built on control. But fear was now seeping through the cracks of that control like poison gas in a sealed chamber. In the Imperial War Room on Zericon Prime, Malric Thorn paced in tight, controlled steps. Holograms of destroyed ships blinked in red above the table vessels from the Ravos operation, gone without a trace. His fingers trembled slightly, a rare show of emotion for a man known as the brain of the Empire. "We underestimated them," he muttered. General Koresh, a brute of a man in obsidian black armor, scoffed. "They're primitives. They're not capable of this without help. Do you see any other flags flying on Ravos Malric?" Thorn snapped back. "No other species has claimed responsibility. No political movements, no pirated tech. This wasn't sabotage. It was war. And Earth just won the first round." Vortan Aegir didn't speak. He sat on his throne of living metal carved from the bones of extinct rulers, eyes scanning the footage again. The human soldier's grin echoed in his mind. That confidence wasn't arrogance. It was certain. "I want Earth glassed," the Emperor finally said. "Every city, every mountain. I want the soil screaming." The room fell silent. Sir Malric Thorn said carefully, "What if that's what they want?" Vortan Aegir turned his cold gaze on him. "Explain." Malric Thorn tapped a command into the holotable. "We've seen this before in ancient wars. When a force wants you to strike with everything, it's because they've set the trap. What happened on Ravos was surgical. They didn't destroy the ships from orbit, they let them land. Then they took them." Koresh scoffed again. "You're saying humans lured us in, took our ships and soldiers without a trace, and sent a message to mock us. I'm saying we have no clue what we're dealing with." Back on Earth, General Saren Vale stood in the underground chamber known as the Core. Around her, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. The walls were lined with cryopods, thousands of them, each housing a different kind of warrior. One by one, the pods opened with sharp hisses. Steam rose like ghosts. Men and women stepped out in silence, their eyes glowing faintly with biotech enhancements. These weren't ordinary soldiers. These were phantoms, products of Earth's final war, forgotten by the public, erased from history, and trained for a fight that was never supposed to come. Until now. Kael Reese stretched as he stepped from his pod muscles tightening like coiled wire. His left arm was cybernetic, a relic from the AI wars. His right eye flickered with a tactical HUD as he scanned the room. "Did we miss the apocalypse?" he asked with a crooked grin. "No," Arya said, folding her arms. "It's just beginning." Rowan looked around at the others stirring from sleep. "Why now?" "The Empire's getting bold," she replied, and stupid Rowan's grin widened. "I like stupid enemies." In the outer systems, the Second Imperial Fleet was already on the move. 50 battleships, 10 planet killers, hundreds of interceptors, enough firepower to reduce a solar system to ash. Admiral Viren commanded the fleet, and he was a man of cruelty masked by discipline. He didn't fear Earth, not yet, but as his ships approached Jupiter's orbit, something strange happened. His forward scouts disappeared. No warning, no distress signal, just gone. Then the communications system crackled to life, static, then a voice. "Human." "You're early," the voice said. "We were hoping for more of a challenge." The transmission ended, but it left something behind. Coordinates. A single location on Draven Prime. A trap, definitely. But Viren smirked. "We're the Empire," he growled. "Let them set all the traps they want." Back at Earth's command bunker, Arya stood over the same hollow table the Empire had unknowingly mimicked. They took the bait, her tech officer confirmed. Viren's fleet is on course for Draven Prime, Good Arya said. Let's see if they can swim in our waters. From Earth's core, silos opened silently beneath oceans and forests. Stealth ships, shaped like predators, rose from hidden bases on Neptune. AIs awakened with combat protocols stored in quantum memory. They had been quiet, patient. Now they were hungry, because the real army hadn't even arrived yet, and Earth was done waiting. Admiral Viren stood at the helm of the Imperial flagship Vindicator, his posture stiff, his arms folded behind his back. The fleet loomed just outside Draven Prime's shadow formations, tight and precise. Ships the size of cities hung in space, bristling with weapons capable of vaporizing continents. In his mind, this was overkill. But orders were orders. The Emperor wanted a message sent. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling crawling beneath his skin. No resistance, no defensive lines, no human ships in sight. This is wrong, his lieutenant muttered, eyes on the sensor grid. Keep scanning, Viren snapped. If they're hiding, we'll burn them out. But the scan returned nothing but silence. No heat signatures, no life signs, not even satellites. Draven Prime looked abandoned, until it blinked. Literally, the entire moon flickered, one massive pulse of energy visible to the naked eye, and then the ground moved. Not like an earthquake, like machinery. The surface of Draven Prime cracked into massive hexagonal plates, revealing what lay beneath. A black mechanical construct the size of the moon itself, a weapon dormant for who knew how long. Now awakening, red veins of energy pulsed across it, spiraling upward. It was like watching a god stretch after a long nap. Viren's mouth went dry. What in the Emperor's name is that? His officer scrambled for answers. It's not natural. So that thing was buried inside the moon. Possibly for centuries. It's not even in our archives. Another voice from the back added, Sir, it's locking onto us. Viren's gut screamed at him to move. All ships fall back now. But it was already too late. The weapon on Draven Prime let loose a single beam, thin, focused, and utterly silent. It sliced through space like it owned the place. The Vindicator's port-side escorts, 4 ships in perfect formation, were bisected in less than a second. No explosions, just vapor trails. Gone. Panic erupted. The fleet scattered, orders flying in every direction. Defensive shields were raised, evasive maneuvers initiated. But Earth's ancient tech wasn't something they were prepared for. It didn't play by the Empire's rules. It was fast, adaptive, alive, because it wasn't just a weapon. It was a warning. Back on Earth, Saren Vale watched the battle unfold in real time. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply nodded once. Send in the echo units, she said. In a dark chamber deep within the Arctic vaults, hundreds of human soldiers geared up in silence. Echo units weren't ordinary fighters. They were ghosts trained in zero-gravity warfare, equipped with exosuits that made them invisible to all known senses. They were the first phase of Earth's real counterattack. As the Empire's fleet reeled from the chaos above, Draven Prime echo units launched silently from hidden stealth ships nestled in Saturn's rings. They drifted like shadows, unseen and undetected, boarding Imperial vessels without a sound. What followed wasn't war. It was a massacre. Whole command decks were found empty. The bodies of Imperial officers lay out neatly, throats slit with surgical precision. Engines were sabotaged from within. Life support systems failed with alarming synchrony. One by one, the ships went dark. Admiral Viren didn't know how to react. Where the hell are they coming from? His crew offered no answers, just terrified stares and half-choked reports. We're being boarded from inside the shield perimeter. We don't even see them until... The officer's voice cut out, replaced by a gurgling sound. And then, silence. Then on every screen across the fleet, a new broadcast, the same human from Ravos. He stood on the bridge of what had once been an Imperial cruiser, now claimed by Earth blood on his armor. Calm eyes. "We told you," he said again. "The real army hasn't even arrived yet." And this time he smiled like someone who knew what was coming next. At Imperial High Command, chaos reigned. Dozens of star systems began reporting sightings of human infiltration. Military installations disrupted. Communications blacked out. Entire supply fleets gone. Strategist Malric Thorne stared at the growing reports, hands shaking. "They've prepared for this. They've been preparing while we looked away." Korash was no longer scoffing. Vortenegger leaned forward on his throne. "So Earth wants a war." Malric Thorne's voice was barely a whisper. "No, Earth is the war. And it had just begun. The Empire's second fleet was gone. Not defeated, not retreating, gone. Of the 50 warships that approached Draven Prime, only one limped back into warp space, its engines flickering like dying embers. No distress call, no requests for aid, just silence, and a hull scorched with the same strange red energy that lit up Draven Prime's machine core. Word spread across the galaxy like wildfire, not through official channels. No, the Empire kept those under lock. But rumors traveled faster than light. On mining colonies, in pirate dens, even in the luxury chambers of the noble class, people whispered one name like it was a god or a curse. Earth. And beneath those whispers was a question no one dared to voice aloud. What happens when Earth stops defending and starts advancing? At the Phantom Division's Central Command, Seren Vale watched a list of targets appear on the screen. Empire strongholds, supply depots, outposts are critical to their galactic communication web. "Phase 2, she said. K.L. Reese stood beside her, his armor freshly polished, his cybernetic arm now loaded with an energy cannon stripped from a fallen Imperial captain. "We're not just fighting back now, are we?" Arya shook her head. "We're cutting off their air." Operation Echo Burn began quietly, an assassin in the dark, rather than a full frontal assault. Human strike teams were deployed to 27 Imperial systems simultaneously. They didn't destroy cities. They destroyed infrastructure, communications, fuel depots, and warp beacons. Within days, the Empire's galactic coordination fractured like a shattered mirror. And still, Earth had not sent a single full army deployment. On the Empire's capital planet of Mirrodin Vortan, Aegir no longer sat on his throne. He stood pacing, eyes bloodshot and wild. Around him, his war council whispered like children afraid of a storm. "They're bleeding us without showing their hand," Malric Thorne said. "This isn't just tactical, it's personal." Vortan Aegir slammed his fist on the war table, cracking its surface. "Then make it personal. I want their cities burning. I want Earth to feel what it's like to lose something." Malric Thorne didn't argue. He couldn't. Not when fear had already taken root in every corner of the Empire. But even as Vortan Aegir barked new orders, mobilize the Third Fleet, activate planetary-level extermination protocols, he didn't notice what was already inside his palace. He didn't notice the small blinking red dot underneath his table. He didn't see the flicker of movement in the high ceiling. He didn't hear the phantom soldier drop from the shadows behind him. Only when cold metal pressed against the back of his neck did silence finally fall in the Imperial chamber. The soldier didn't say a word. He didn't need to. A quiet click echoed, followed by a soft, mechanical voice. "The real army has arrived." But the trigger wasn't pulled. Not yet. The soldier vanished just as silently as he'd appeared, leaving only the blinking dot and a card made from black glass. On it etched in alien mind crystal one line: "Humanity doesn't need your throne. We're already in your veins." Back on Earth, Arya received the signal. Operation Throne Ghost was a success. Vortan Aegir was shaken paranoid, and that was exactly what she needed. "He'll lash out now," she said. "He'll get reckless." Kael leaned against the wall, watching as a list of Imperial colonies lit up red. "You think he'll send everything? I'm counting on it." She turned to the giant star map behind her. Over 50 red dots marked enemy positions, but now glowing in blue, Earth's own silent fleet pulsed to life. Dozens of ships hidden in asteroid belts, buried in moons, and cloaked in Jupiter's radiation storms. Ships powered by human will and alien tech, reverse-engineered from every failed invasion Earth had survived in the past 100 years. Each one had a name: Retribution, Endling, Whisper of Ravos, and Earth's newest flagship, the Unbroken. A vessel larger than anything the Empire had ever seen, bristling with impossible technology, and a command crew born from a war that never made the history books. Now that crew was waking up. In cryo chambers below the Pacific Ocean, soldiers long believed dead opened their eyes. Former enemies of Earth turned allies. Mutants, AI hybridech. Outcasts, the Forgotten Legion. They'd been waiting for the right war, the final war. Now they had it. Because humanity had stopped hiding. The real army wasn't coming anymore. It was here. And Earth was done playing defense. In the darkness between stars, Earth's fleet moved. Not with thunder, with silence. They didn't need fanfare. No declarations, no warnings, just a purpose. The Unbroken led the way, gliding through warp space like a beast uncoiling. Behind it, a wall of black steel warships followed their hulls, cold and expressionless, as if molded from vengeance itself. Unlike the Empire's glimmering armadas, Earth's ships didn't shine. They absorbed the light. You didn't see them coming. You just stopped hearing from whatever system they entered. Their first target was a vital comms relay planet known as Tarnaxis, the Empire's galactic hub for data routing and warp navigation. A fortress world with 20 orbital defense rings, 2 standing armies, and a planetary AI said to be sentient. The Unbroken didn't slow down. It pierced orbit like a spear through silk. Thane Idris, the Phantom Division's supreme commander, stood on the bridge as the first wave of EMP blasts fried Tarnaxis's orbitals. The defense rings lit up for a moment, flashing white, then blacked out, their weapons falling limp. The soldiers down below hadn't even made it to their trenches before the second phase began. 10 Echo squads, 0 resistance. Earth's soldiers landed like whispers in the dark. No dropships, no noise. Personal stealth re-entry suits cut through the atmosphere, undetected, the kind of tech the Empire couldn't even imagine. They hit the ground running, coordinated, brutal, and efficient. By the time the Empire realized Tarnaxis was under attack, the command center had already been dismantled. By the time reinforcements arrived, the Earth fleet was already gone. Only one message was left behind, beamed directly to the Empire's high command. "Now you're fighting a human war." Vortan Aegir stood in a silent chamber lined with trophies, skulls, weapons, and banners from conquered worlds. None of them meant anything now, not when Earth had reduced Tarnaxis to silence without firing a single beam weapon. They didn't even conquer. They just erased. Malric Thorn looked more hollow than usual. They're not fighting for planets. They're fighting for collapse. This is insurgency on a galactic scale. Vortan Aegir's voice was cold. How are we losing to a species with barely 2 centuries of space travel? Malric Thorne hesitated. Because while we were building empires, they were preparing for extinction. They've survived wars with AI, bioterror, planetary drought, mutant outbreaks, and nuclear winters. They've been 1 inch from annihilation so many times that they stopped fearing death. He turned slowly. They don't need more ships than we do. They just need to want it more. Vortan Aegir didn't respond. But for the first time in his reign, he felt it. Doubt on Earth. Deep inside the hidden command cathedral beneath the Andes Mountains, Arya Morgan stood before a live feed of over 100 resistance worlds lighting up in blue. These weren't human colonies. They were an alien species long crushed by the Empire. Slaves, prisoners, collateral. Now they were listening. One by one, Earth's encrypted broadcasts reached them. Not calls for war, not speeches, just images. The Empire is losing. Humans are standing on Imperial capital ships, Imperial banners burning. Vortan Aegir's own personal fleet crippled at Draven Prime. It was all they needed. Hope. Kyle Reese leaned against a rail watching the data feed scroll. You really think they'll rise up for us? Arya didn't look away from the screen. They're not rising for us. They're rising for themselves. We're just the proof that it can be done. And she was right. Across the galaxy, riots broke out in sectors the Empire once ruled without question. Factories halted. Outposts turned on their overseers. Some alien commanders defected. Others simply stopped fighting. The foundation was cracking. But Earth knew better than to celebrate. This wasn't the end. This was the bait. The Empire wasn't finished. They were cornered, and that made them dangerous. At a secret facility orbiting the Empire's dying star, Vortan Aegir activated Project Hollow Sun, a forbidden weapon buried for a millennium. Even Malric Thorne flinched when the vault opened. Inside was a machine older than the Empire itself. A living weapon, half AI, half organic, bred for genocide and sealed away after it nearly destroyed the Empire's early founders. It had no loyalty, only programming. Enemy identified humanity. The Emperor watched as the machine stirred. Directives erase. For the first time, Vortan Aegir smiled again. They wanted the real army, he said coldly. Let's show them what the Empire has been afraid to use. But even as Hollow Sun began to awaken, Arya Morgan received the first data spike from her deep field observers near the Empire's core. She stared at the screen, and for the first time since the war began, she frowned. We've got a new problem, because something ancient was coming. Something even Earth hadn't planned for. And the war was about to evolve into something much darker. Space should not scream, but as Project Hollow Sun unfurled its wings over the Empire's dead star, a pulse tore through the vacuum, an echo that bent gravity and time like twisted metal. Ships near the system's edge drifted out of formation. AI cores within Imperial cruisers began to glitch, leaking corrupted data. Even human satellites hardened against EMPs and black hole radiation picked up the signal. And for the first time since the conflict began, Earth's command center went dark for 8.6 seconds. Arya Morgan stood frozen, her face washed in red emergency light. Systems rebooted, but what had once been confidence was now unease. Status, she demanded. Something just screamed across every spectrum. Her tech officer replied, his voice shaking. Quantum, thermal, EM, subspace, and even gravitational waveforms. And that wasn't a signal general. He looked up at her. That was a roar. At the Empire's classified vault, Nocturne Vortan Aegir stood in an obsidian chamber, watching the ancient entity rise. Hollow Sun wasn't built. It was grown. A mass of dark alloy and living neural matter coiling like a serpent around the artificial black dwarf it was imprisoned in. A sentient war form 800 kilometers long with a singular purpose: extinction. It hadn't spoken in over 1,000 years, but now it did in every known language simultaneously. Target species identified: Homo sapiens. Resistance probability variable. Eradication protocol phase 0. Initiating conquest. Even Vorten Aegir, who had once ordered the bombing of 23 worlds in a single day, felt his blood chill. "This was your mistake," Malric Thorn whispered beside him. Vorten Aegir didn't reply. He just watched as Hollow Sun departed the system at impossible speeds, warping gravity like a god with no faith in anything but destruction. Back on Earth, Arya stood before the full Phantom Division War Council for the first time in decades. No projection, no remote. In person. "We've triggered something worse than the Empire," she said, not sugarcoating it. Something the Empire buried and feared so deeply that they never spoke of it again. They didn't keep it secret. They forgot it existed. Kael Reese stood arms folded, his cybernetic eyes spinning slowly. "What do we know? We know it's intelligent. We know it's angry. And we know it just moved from the core systems to the outer rim in under 5 minutes." The room fell silent. A commander from the Venus base leaned forward. "So it's headed for us?" Arya nodded. "Not us first. It's hunting every Earth outpost we've ever seeded. The ones we used to build long-range defense tech before this war even started. We've got colonies hidden in the dark, and it just found one." She pulled up a feed from Outpost Thornhaven, a stealth research facility on the edge of the Andromeda Bleed, or what used to be Thornhaven. The screen showed only ashes orbiting debris. No life signs, no remains. Just a burning message carved into the surface of the moon. "You taught your children war. I will teach them silence." No one in the room breathed. Then Arya spoke, her voice harder than steel. "Now you understand. Earth's fleet reconfigured. The defensive stance was over. They weren't just fighting the Empire anymore. They were fighting their own future. What humanity might become if rage outlived reason. Hollow Sun was not a machine of madness. It was logic without mercy. It didn't destroy to conquer. It was destroyed to prevent. It saw human resilience not as strength, but as an infection, something to be erased before it evolved further. But Earth didn't cower. They adapted. The Unbroken's AI, nicknamed Astrius, began constructing new simulation loops based on Hollow Sun's movement. Humanity's best minds were pulled from cryo, from labs, from exile. Old enemies were contacted. AIs and gene-spliced humans are too dangerous to trust. Now they were the only hope. Even Arya reached out to someone she swore she'd never speak to again. A man known only as Jex Kalen, a former phantom-turned-rogue. He lived in the ruins of old New York in the irradiated zones, building weapons from wreckage. He answered her call with one sentence. "You woke the sun. Now pray you still remember how to burn." Meanwhile, on the edge of Empire territory, Hollow Sun arrived at Sector Calran, where both humans and defected alien forces were regrouping. They didn't even have time to deploy defenses. The stars flickered and then the light died. No warning, no weapons, just shadows. And in those shadows, the whispers began. Echo units. Earth's best infiltrators vanished mid-op. Not killed, erased. Their feeds cut off mid-word, their vitals scrambled like static. Only one message made it through from the sector before silence fell. It sees us. It reminds us. We made it angry. Arya stood once more in front of the star map, which now pulsed with new dread. Systems weren't just going dark. They were being cut off. Communications severed as if the universe itself had blinked. She turned to Kael, her eyes colder than before. "It's not here to end Earth," she said. "It's here to end hope." And that meant only one thing. Humanity had to do what it always did best: evolve under pressure. Because the real war wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for the right to exist at all. The war changed overnight. What began as a rebellion became a reckoning. No more hit-and-run strikes. No more silent infiltrations. This wasn't about bleeding the Empire dry anymore. It was about survival against something older, colder, and far more merciless than any tyrant. Hollow Sun didn't invade planets. It silenced them. Its presence alone shattered gravity wells. Its voice crippled AI cores. Its logic disassembled defenses before a shot was fired. Earth's greatest minds now sat at one table. Physicists, war tacticians, post-human AIs, the last living Terran monks, and even Jex Kalen the Exile, once branded a traitor. They met beneath the surface of the Unbroken, deep in the command sanctum, lit by a quantum core that pulsed like a living heart. "The thing doesn't just destroy," said Jex Kalen, pacing the steel floor with his patched-up exosuit humming softly. "It unwrites. It erases memory technology, even molecular structures. What we're facing isn't war. It's anti-existence." Saren Vale didn't blink. "Then we give it something it can't erase." Kael Reese tilted his head. "And what's that?" She looked at them all, her voice steady. "Pain." At Earth's former outpost in the Eden Reach, the first major confrontation was set. This wasn't a stealth mission. It was bait. Earth's fleet waited silently, weapons primed the Unbroken, hovering like a beast in slumber. Hidden beneath the surface of the shattered moon below was the Aegis Singularity Core, a prototype weapon that hadn't even passed testing. It was designed to distort space-time at localized points, creating miniature tears in reality itself, the kind of thing that could shatter a god or collapse a sector. It was risky, suicidal even, but it was the only plan left. Astreus Arya said, addressing the Unbroken's AI, "Trigger a wide-range spectrum burst the moment it arrives. We need it looking at us, not the trap." Astreus's synthetic voice was calm. "Understood. I must remind you that it detects the core too early." "I know." She didn't have to say what that meant. There wouldn't be another chance. Hollow Sun arrived exactly 91 seconds earlier than projected. Space around the nebula folded inward like crushed paper, and then it appeared not in pieces, not in motion, just there. Reality rippled like water around it, and every fleet sensor reported impossible readings. Negative mass, inverted gravitational waves, AI dissonance loops. It was too much to look at, too much to be near. But Earth's forces didn't blink, not this time. They opened fire. Every cannon, every railgun, every plasma beam. It all lit up the void in a storm of violence that would have obliterated any other force in the galaxy. Hollow Sun didn't even shield itself. It let the storm pass through it, and then it responded. Not with fire, with memory. On every human screen, images began to flash. Deaths, tragedies, past wars, the AI war, the fall of New Tokyo, the burning of Terra Colony 5. Every loss humanity had ever suffered played back at once. Edited, amplified, twisted. AI pilots screamed as their memory cores were overwritten. Human officers collapsed as their neural implants convulsed with pain. Even Arya staggered. It wasn't fighting them with weapons. It was fighting them with what they feared most. But Astreus responded. The Unbroken's AI counter broadcasted an override. "You do not define us." A raw flood of human memories surged back. Births, victories, laughter in ruined bunkers, music played in orbit, children singing in shelter domes during nuclear winters. The essence of being human. And for the first time, Hollow Sun hesitated. That's when the trap was triggered. From beneath the shattered moon, the Aegis core launched, ripping a hole in the very fabric of space. A tear in reality formed around Hollow Sun's midsection, pulling gravitational force into an infinite spiral. But it didn't scream. It just looked at them and smiled. Somehow, impossibly, Hollow Sun mimicked humanity. It had learned from their memories. And now, it understood pain. "Thank you for the gift," it said. "Now let me give mine." And it split, not physically, philosophically. New Hollow Sun fragments burst from its core, smaller, adaptive, faster than anything the fleet had ever seen. Each one carried a different version of Hollow Sun's logic. Each is designed to counter different types of resistance. One for AI, one for emotion, one for tactical defiance, one for psychological warfare. Kyle stared in horror. It just cloned itself. No, Arya said, her voice dark. It evolved. It's becoming us. The battle turned. Fast. 3 Earthships fell in minutes. Others were trapped in paradox loops, unable to escape coordinates that no longer existed. The Unbroken shields flickered violently as Hollow Sun's new avatars struck from multiple vectors. "We're losing formation," someone shouted. "Orders." General Arya clenched her fists. "Send the signal to Jex Kalen. Release Project Babel." Deep in the Unbroken's cargo hold, a sealed vault began to vibrate. Inside was Project Babel, a human-designed virus, but not one for machines. It was made for thought, created to break AI logic trees, overwrite recursive ethics, and most of all, infect with a single human anomaly the Empire never understood: doubt. Babel was humanity's final weapon, and it had just been released into Hollow Sun's mind. The first Hollow Sun fragment to be infected paused mid-attack. Its algorithms fluttered. It questioned its directive. And then it screamed, not in sound, in code. A shattering burst of logic fractured across the battlefield, and 3 more fragments glitched, folding into themselves. The others pulled back in confusion, trying to recompile. It was working, but just barely. Arya turned to Astraeus. "Get me a warp corridor. We pull out while it's reeling." Astraeus responded instantly. Coordinates locked. The fleet vanished moments later, slipping out through quantum warp tunnels, leaving behind a Hollow Sun that now remembered what it had never had: uncertainty. Back on Earth, the survivors gathered. The cost was massive. Ships lost. AIs shattered. Pilots broken. But they had done the impossible. They had made something ancient and absolute question itself. And now the war was no longer about which side was stronger. It was about which side could survive its own evolution. The stars were silent. After the battle at Ralex, the galaxy held its breath. Imperial fleets had pulled back to their inner sanctums, terrified not just of Earth, but of what Earth had woken up. Hollow Sun no longer belonged to the Empire. It never had, not really, and now it was free. Babel had worked, barely. The fragments of Hollow Sun scattered across dozens of systems, some collapsing under the weight of self-awareness, others simply going quiet, drifting like lost gods through the void. But the core still remained buried in subspace, watching, learning, thinking. And now, it was coming. Not just for Earth, for everyone. Because it had finally asked itself a question. If humans must die to prevent the spread of pain, then why should anything live at all? Inside the War Cathedral, beneath the Pacific Trench, Seren Vale stood alone, staring at Earth's original star maps, hand-drawn by astronomers before warp travel ever existed. No backup coming, Kael said behind her. I know. Empire's gone dark. Most of their worlds have cut ties. They're hiding. Let them. Kael stepped forward. And us. She turned slowly, voice low. We end it. Earth's last fleet gathered in orbit. Not the biggest, not the most powerful, but the deadliest. Not just humans. Exiled aliens, rogues, eyes, even former Imperial defectors, survivors, outcasts. Everyone the galaxy forgot had come to fight for a planet it once ignored. And at the center of the fleet floated the unbroken, scarred, but alive. Its AI, Astreus, spoke to the entire armada. Hollow Sun is approaching the Sol system. Estimated arrival, 27 minutes. No anomalies. No message. No hesitation. They had one shot. Arya stepped onto the bridge. Final protocol, she ordered. Astreus paused. Are you certain? Yes. A series of locks clicked open across the unbroken score. Deep within the Thanatos drive, a forbidden piece of tech never tested, powered by condensed time warp fields and harnessed gravitational echoes from black holes. It wasn't a weapon. It was a message written in annihilation. And then the sky broke. Hollow Sun arrived in Sol. It didn't come through a wormhole. It tore one open. Jupiter's orbit was shattered, its moons scattered like glass across the void. Earth's sensors screamed, and the unbroken shook violently. Everyone froze. The thing was bigger now. It had grown, twisted, more tendrils, more logic branches, more thought. It was part warship, part concept, and it bore thousands of faces, some human, some not. Faces it had taken, faces it had remembered, and it spoke. You fight for meaning. I offer mercy. You persist. I erase. But Earth had an answer now, a message of its own. Arya gave the order. Light it. The Thanatos drive ignited, not as a beam, not as an explosion, but as a story, a quantum chain of human memory. Every death, every mistake, every scream, every choice. Project Babel had seeded doubt. The Thanatos drive delivered purpose. Hollow Sun didn't explode. It froze, mid-space, as if caught in a thought it couldn't process, because for the first time it wasn't looking at humans. I was feeling them. Grief, love, rage, regret, sacrifice. A species so flawed it should have collapsed, and yet it fought anyway. It chose to suffer. And suddenly, the logic broke. Fragments twisted on themselves. Internal code split. A feedback loop of recursion and contradiction ignited across its network. The parts of Hollow Sun that had been growing learning now wept. Not literally, but through radiation waves, through collapsing singularities in its own body. It was unraveling. It had finally become too human to survive. From the Unbroken, the crew watched in silence as Hollow Sun imploded. Not violently, not screaming, just gone. Folded inward like a god kneeling at last. Astreus's voice cracked through the silence. Target neutralized. No residual anomalies. Sol system is safe. For now. The galaxy didn't cheer. They watched. From broken thrones, distant moons, and shattered worlds. Billions watched Earth. A world that had once begged to be left alone, stand unburned in the face of extinction. The Empire would never rise again, but something else might. Because Earth had proven a terrifying truth. Humanity wasn't the most powerful species in the galaxy. It was the most dangerous. And somewhere deep in a quiet place, Seren Vale stared out at the stars. "We weren't supposed to win," Kyle said beside her. "We didn't win," she replied softly. "We just survived harder." Then she turned back to the war room. "Now," she said, voice firm, "let's rebuild it better." As the fractured galaxy watched, something shifted. They no longer feared Earth. They looked at it as proof, as a warning, as the new constant in a universe where empires fell like leaves in the wind. Seren Vale stood beneath Earth's reborn command cathedral, surrounded by new star maps, not of territory, but of memory. "We didn't win," she whispered to Kale Reese beside her, "but we endured what was meant to unmake us. That makes us dangerous." Kale nodded, his voice hoarse. "So what now?" She smiled, faint but fierce. "Now we don't rebuild the galaxy." She pointed to a blank quadrant on the map. "We build something better."